going to talk a little bit about the GMAT as an exam to start. So from your introductions, I gathered that a lot of us don't have a lot of experience with the exam so far, so we're going to start with a general overview of what the test is. Did any of you take the SAT back when you were in high school? Remember this exam? Fond memories of the SAT? In a lot of ways, this exam, the GMAT, is not radically different in that you're going to complete 3 different sections on the test. You're going to write essays to begin. You're going to do 2 multiple choice sections. One of them is quantitative, and that's about mathematics. And then you're going to do a verbal reasoning section. So you do 2 multiple choice sections and 1 writing section on test day. You write essays for an hour to start. So the first thing you do is write 2 30-minute essays. And then when you do multiple choice sections, they're each 75 minutes long. So you do 2 hour and 15-minute multiple choice sections. There are 2 kinds of questions in the math. There are 3 kinds of questions in the verbal, but those are the overall details. So the exam in terms of format is rather similar to college entrance exams. The really great news about math on the GMAT, it's literally the same level of mathematics as occurred on the SAT. So the good news is that it's not any harder. The bad news is that it's probably been longer since you did the math than when you took the SAT back when you were in high school. So you don't have to learn any new math to do well on this exam. You do need to relearn the math that you might have forgotten if you don't use it day to day in your career. In terms of the verbal, you're going to do reading comprehension. You're going to read passages and answer questions about them. You're going to do some questions where you have sentences and you need to correct the grammar. So it's basically playing copy editor, which some of us might do, at least at times with our jobs already. And then some of the questions are what are called critical reasoning questions. They're short arguments, and then you're asked how to strengthen or weaken the argument. What was the flaw in the reasoning? Did the author make any assumptions? So you'll have a small number of questions that work that way as well. But those are the basics in terms of the format of the exam. What we're going to talk about in more detail is not the content, but the format of the exam and how that plays on. So let's move on to the next slide. So GMAT is scored overall on a range from 200 to 800 points. So there are 61 possible scores on the GMAT because those occur in 10-point increments. So let's start with the 50th percentile. That is, the middle of the road is actually a 550. 550 points is the halfway score. 50% of test takers score above, 50% of test takers score below that number. So if you're hitting that number, you're exactly in the middle of the pack. 100 points above that, you can see right here, a 650 is almost the 80th percentile. I think it's 79.2, something like that. So about 80 percentile if you go that other 100 points. And then the 90th percentile, meaning a score that's putting you in the running for top business schools, the very top program, is about a 700 on the exam. 700 or above means you are in great shape to be admitted to top 10, even top 5 programs in the world with that kind of score. So we've also listed a little bit of data here about average or median GMAT scores at top 5 programs. So including locally Stanford, which if you don't know yet, you will find out soon in your research phase. Stanford Graduate School of Business has the highest median GMAT score of any business school on the planet. That's on one hand a source of pride for those of us locally. It also means it's not super easy to get into our institution down in Palo Alto. So these are average scores at top schools. Let's talk about the computer adaptive nature of the exam. How many of you have heard already that the GMAT's on computer? Had you heard this before? You were aware? So some of us knew, some of us didn't. The GMAT is not administered pencil and paper, so you don't get a booklet with the testing that you take in front of you. You actually take the computer, or the exam, on a computer. You go to a computer testing facility and sit in a little cubicle in front of the screen and you take the exam that way. A computer adaptive test means exactly what it's titled. It's on computer, but it's also adaptive, meaning the test adapts as you're taking it. So you start the test at the beginning, you are presumed to be a middle of the road score. That is, the scoring algorithm just assumes everybody's going to be like a 500. You're right in the middle. So at the beginning of the test, you get medium level questions, And then after you answer a few questions, if you get, say, out of the first 4 questions, you get all 4 of them right, you get a reward. Your score goes up because you got all of those questions right. But at the same time, to compensate, the difficulty level of the next few questions increases. So the test gets harder because you have proved that you were capable of answering harder questions. As the test continues, you can see, right, the idea is that the test moves up and down. That is, you'll get some questions right, things will get better. And then, say, you miss half of those questions, so they get a little bit easier. And then you get some more right, and it continues again. Maybe you miss a few, so it goes down. The test literally changes, so everyone who sits for the exam takes a different GMAT. You have different questions that you receive than the person sitting next to you, even if you started exactly the same. So computer adaptive tests have some interesting implications in terms of how they work. If you've never done this before, I absolutely recommend the first thing Kaplan would tell anyone who's thinking about preparing for a computer adaptive test is take a practice exam. You can do this for free. Kaplan sponsors them all the time online, so that you take them in the format of the exam. But definitely make sure that you start by just seeing what this feels like. I remember when I was preparing, the first time I did this, it just felt weird because the exam changed while I was doing it, which means I was thinking about how I was performing while I was taking the exam, which felt different. So let's talk about some of those implications of what it means that it's a computer adaptive test. In terms of timing, what's really important about a computer adaptive exam is that if you don't finish the section, there's a penalty for leaving questions unanswered. So you have to be sure to stay on average time. The other timing implication, which is actually nice for all of us, computer adaptive exams are about almost half the length of what the test would be if it were still a pencil paper test. And when it's a pencil and paper exam, they have to give everyone the full array of low and medium and high difficulty questions. On a computer adaptive exam, it just jumps right to where you should be testing. So the test is actually quite a bit shorter than it used to be. That part's nice. That's the one-to-one benefit. Guessing strategy, you have to move on because you can't leave questions unanswered. You can't skip something and come back to it later because, of course, the exam is adapting while you're taking it. And so you don't have an opportunity like you do on pencil-based exam, paper-based exam, to go back and redo a question or something, right? You realize that you wanted to change an answer. So you have to, at times, if you're not sure, guess something anyway and just move on. The psychology exam is interesting because on a computer-based exam, because you know it's adapting to how you're performing, there's a temptation to want to be thinking about, is this question harder than the last one I got, or is this easier? Did I miss that question? Am I getting things? You can often, if you're not careful, let yourself fall into this pattern of analyzing, over-analyzing how you're performing while you're taking the exam. And so certainly a large part of what I do in classes at Kaplan when I teach is help my students come to terms with these sort of additional psycho-emotional elements of taking an exam that's adapting while you're taking it, and how to use that actually to your advantage instead. Practice, practice, practice. Computer adaptive exams are totally beatable, but they take a little bit of work to get accustomed to doing and to having it feel okay that at the end of the section things were really difficult. That's a great sign. Because if things got really tough, that means the exam actually did adapt to your peak ability level. And pencil-based exams, paper-based exams didn't really feel that way, or didn't necessarily feel that way for everyone. So I know that my advice to everyone is take practice exams. No matter how you prepare for this test, make sure part of your preparation includes taking practice exams that are actually on a computer, online, with a CD-ROM, something so that you aren't only practicing out of a book, because that's the only way to get realistic practice for this exam. Any general questions about just the way the exam is put together before we move on from there? Excellent. You change your mind, Renee?
Oh, just it seems like a strategy in terms of taking a test. Sometimes to make you feel like not answering the question correct.
Yeah, well, and part of that is
So that you trick the
yeah.
computer.
Well, and part of it, I don't know, if we trick the exam so much as there are certainly strategic implications in terms of at times there will be a question and you realize, for example, say in the quantitative section, I know there's a formula for how to do this, but I don't remember what the formula is right now. I wish I did, but I know I don't. Your options are either to just, well, devote a lot of time and hope you figure it out anyway, or sometimes realize, if I'm a little strategic, I could probably eliminate one or two of these answers for being unreasonably high or unreasonably low, and then I'm not sure what the formula is, but only if these three answers in the middle seem reasonable, I'm going to guess one of those and just move on. That is, at times, there are strategic implications here that wouldn't apply if you were doing the exam in a notebook, right, in a test booklet, and then if you remembered the formula 4 questions later, you could come back. Sometimes you have to chalk it up to that. So that's part of the adjustment that certainly comes with just getting accustomed to taking the exam in this format. It's about half the length of what we do otherwise. That's the nice thing. The other implications just take a little bit of work to get used to. Anything else that you're curious about right now? How many of you are more excited about the GMAT now than you were a few minutes ago? Right? Does that sound great? Question?
Yeah. So when you go in to take the GMAT, you don't have pens or paper or anything. You just go and sit.
You have what you're provided with. You actually do, because you don't have scratch paper. It's not actually physical paper. They give you a note board. It's a set of 6 sheets. It's spiral bound at the top, and it's laminated graph paper. So it is graph paper, which is nice for like when you're working out math problems sometimes, or you want to draw a picture, and you get a marker. So you write literally with a
like a dry erase marker type of
right. There's no eraser. They just give you a marker. If you fill up your booklet, you raise your hand, and the proctor brings you a new notepad. So this is how it works on test day. So you have an unending supply of 6 sheets at a time of laminated graph paper. So, for example, if you were to prepare with Kaplan, we actually provide you a notepad just like that, so that when you're doing your practice exam, you have to practice writing everything out with a marker on a notepad, because that's how it's going to run on test day. So that's another just small thing to get accustomed to doing, because you do have scratch paper in a sense, but it's not actually paper. I don't know why they do it that way, but this is the choice of the administrators of the exam. Excellent. Let's move on to next. So here we're going to talk a little bit more detail about GMAT scores overall and how they work. This is the most recent list from 2010, U.S. News and World Report top MBA program, of what they rank as the top 10 business schools and their average scores. The real point of this page, one, is to shout out right to our local schools. You notice both Stanford and Haas at Berkeley made the top 10. My alma mater, the University of Michigan, I regret was not on this list. But if you consult the Wall Street Journal's list of business programs that produce the most employable MBAs, I think Michigan ranks number 1 or 2. So small plug, MGO Blue for Michigan. What I will say is, what we really want you to notice in particular is down in the bottom corner, is just take away this general message that the top 10 business schools, as they stand right now, the average GMAT score is a 715. It is pretty high. That is above the 90th percentile on the exam of those top 10 programs. The average acceptance rate at those schools collectively is 15% of applicants, so it's not terribly high. So we're going to talk on the next page in even more detail about these scores and what they mean. GMAT scores are important, but they are certainly not the only factor that determines admission. So we're going to talk about how they relate to the other things that are going to happen. At top 10 business schools, you can see the average undergraduate GPA is a 3.56, right? That is roughly half A's and half B's during your undergraduate career. For the top 20 schools, that average is a little bit lower, just below a 3.5, right at a 3.46. So grades certainly are part of what matters, but for most business schools, what's even more important is this next one, which is your work experience. At 63%, right, so close to 2/3 of business school applicants have more than 3 years of work experience, some significantly more. And especially if you've been out of school for a while, your work experience and your GMAT score are probably going to count more than your undergraduate GPA. So, Sergio, was this in line with the question you were going to? Okay, yeah. So if you're applying, say, just a couple years out of business school, they're going to care probably a great deal still about your undergraduate coursework because it wasn't very long ago, and it's probably a decent indication of how you're going to succeed in business school again. The longer you've been out of school, the more weight business schools tend to put on the GMAT score as an indicator of your current academic ability because, to use for lack of a better term, sometimes your grades get stale. If it's been 10 or 20 years or longer since you were in undergrad, that may not be a great indicator today of how you might perform in classes. So, as a general matter, the longer you've been away from your undergraduate education, the more weight that schools will put on the GMAT score. At top 10 schools, certainly any score above a 720, meaning above their median, is going to be a definite advantage in terms of your GMAT score. Especially at top programs, if you're below a 700, that for the GMAT score is definitely a disadvantage. Folks with those scores still get in, but they get in because something else in their application really catches the eye of the admissions officer who's reading your whole application package. So GMAT score isn't the whole story, but at most schools it is a large initial threshold. At a lot of schools, GMAT score is an indicator to them of whether you're going to be able to handle the academic work. So if your score is high enough, then you are presumptively able to handle the work. You go into this pile of, we're probably going to let you in unless something else in your application package scares us. There are some folks who are in the middle of the road. You're close to the average score, you're a little below the average score, but nothing to be concerned about. If the score is particularly lower than the average, then they're going to be presuming that we're not sure whether they're up to the task of keeping up with their peers here, but maybe something else will lead us to believe otherwise. So GMAT score isn't the whole story, but it's used often as an initial metric, in large part because GMAT scores are less arbitrary, more standardized than grades. If two folks have exactly the same GPA, but they went to two different schools at two different times, I don't really know if that same number means the same thing for those two applicants. But everyone takes the GMAT under almost essentially the same conditions. It's the same exam under the same conditions. Scores are only valid for 5 years. So scores can't, beyond that, right, no longer even count. So it's a recent indication of your performance, and this is part of why schools put a lot of stock in that number. Does that make sense? Any questions about those relative factors? All right. So the big message I want you to take away is GMAT matters, but it's not the only thing that matters. Of course, the ideal situation is to score as well as you possibly can so that everything on your application, right, are really strong credentials. You give no questions at all to folks on the admissions committee. So what we're going to do now, you can see from the page, is talk a little bit about strategy. Specifically, we're going to do some practice questions together, so we're going to put our thinking caps on and be GMAT students for just a little bit. We're going to do 2 verbal questions and 2 quantitative questions. So get excited. Fun time's about to happen. So I'm going to step into my actual teacher role, and you're going to be students. Is everybody thrilled about this? Yes, I see your smiling faces. Yes, good. Time to be students. So go ahead and open up your packets that you have in front of you. And we're going to work through, again, a small number. I'm going to be working on the whiteboard right here. So you'll want to pull out this sheet that literally has some copied questions on it. And we're going to alternate. We're going to do a math question, then a verbal question, then a math, then a verbal. So go ahead and pull that out. We're going to start on the very first page. We're going to do the one at the bottom of the page. It's labeled as number 16. So we're going to go ahead and we'll begin there. And as always happens in class with me at Kaplan, I'll have someone read this out for us. So I'll have you go first. Go ahead and read number 16 for us, and then we'll work it out together. What does it say?
16.
Yeah.
If A equals 105, and A squared equals 21 times 25 times 45 times B, what is the value of B?
Excellent. Thank you. So we're going to do a little bit of math. We are asked in this question to solve for the value of B. We're asked to determine what that equals given this equation. Now, the first inclination you might have, which is correct but not very efficient, is, well, I could take 105 and substitute that for A. That is, I could do 105 cubed, and then divide by 21, and divide by 25, and divide by 45, and what's left over is B. That's totally correct. But doing it that way will take you about 12 years. Maybe not quite that long, but it'll fill an entire sheet with scratch work. So we're going to talk about one of Kaplan's suggestions for dealing with really large numbers, especially like triple-digit numbers, and you're asked to multiply them or divide them. When you have really large numbers, what I want you to think on test day is, the fancy term is prime factors. What I prefer to call it, because this is what I was called when I was in like junior high and elementary school, is a factor tree. So we're not going to think of the number 105 as 105. Instead, we're going to think of 105 as a set of factors. That is, what are the numbers that multiply together to produce 105? What is 105 divisible by? For example, good work for today. It ends in a 5, so I know for sure I can divide it by 5. Let's do the math. 5 times what gives you 105? 5 times 20 would be 100, right? Because 5 $20 bills is 100. 21. 5 times 21 will give you 105. What's 21 divisible by? What is this equal to? Yeah, 21 is 3 times 7. So I will rewrite 105 as, I can think of it as 3 times 5 times 7. Does that step make sense? 105 is easier to think of as 3 times 5 times 7. What that means, now I'm going to rewrite our equation and say 105 cubed equals 21 times 25 times 45 times B. So all I've done is substitute 105 for A. But here's where things get really fun, really fast. I'm not going to actually cube 105. I'm not going to figure out what that is. 105 cubed is huge. Instead, I'm going to rewrite this as 3 times 5 times 7 cubed. I'm going to write it 3 times. 3 times 5 times 7, 3 times out, equals 21 times 25 times 45 times B. We are one step away from magic at this point. Once you've done this step, did this part make sense? Wrote 3 times 5 times 7, 3 times over. Once I do that, if these two sides are equal, I can cancel all of the pieces that are the same. What is 21 equal to? 3 times 7. What's 25 equal to? 25 is 5 times 5. 45, what's that equal to? 9 times 5, but 9 is 3 times 3 times 5. So B must be what's left over. B is 49. You will get this question right, even if you do the direct mathematics. You could write out on your notepad, write on your scratch paper, 105 times 105 times 105, and then divide by these 3 numbers. That's not wrong. But whenever you have really large numbers that you're asked to multiply or divide, break them into their factors first, and it makes your whole mathematics life much simpler, much more straightforward. Any questions about what we just did there? So here's the takeaway message. When you have really big numbers that you're asked to multiply and divide, and it's not simple even things. 100 divided by 10, do that by hand. When you have 10,000 divided by 422, when you have big numbers, break them into their factors first. Everything will get simpler. Excellent. Is everybody getting excited about math? This feels good. Feel like you're back in high school? Let's do a verbal question next. So go ahead and turn, if you will, in the packet to the next page. And on the next page, we're going to do together one of the critical reasoning questions. This also happens to be number 16. At least it was in this lesson. So the top of the page is number 16, and we're going to read through this question together. At Kaplan, you would find out that we always read the question below the paragraph first. That is, we begin by reading the question itself so that we know what we're being asked when we go into the argument. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to read the question first, and then we'll go up from there. Number 16, yep, so this, the one at the top on the next page. Is it Lila? Lila, okay, excellent. Would you go ahead and read that question for us? So number 16, right below the paragraph, starts with which of the following?
Which of the following points to the most serious logical flaw in the reasoning above?
Excellent. So we're looking for the flaw in this argument. That's why it's great to read the question first, because then we know already that it's flawed. We know there's some problem with it. And so we're going to read this. In fact, Lila's going to read this for us. Everybody's going to listen along. And then we're going to talk about the common flaw pattern that's represented here. So would you go ahead and read that paragraph for us, please?
It appears that the number of people employed by a typical American software firm decreased in the 1980s and 1990s. This trend is borne out by two studies, conducted 20 years apart. In a large 1980 sample of randomly chosen American software firms, the median size of the firm's workforce populations was 65. When those same firms were studied again in 2000, the median size was 57.
Excellent, thank you so much. So in the argument as written, the claim is that the median size of a software firm has decreased. Because what was the median size when they did the first survey back in 1980? What was the median size then? It was 65, and then they surveyed those same companies again in 2000, and what had happened to the median? What did it change to? It went down to 57. So on its surface, the argument seems okay. The median size was 65, then it went to 57. That seems lower, so they claim the median size shrank. Well-trained Kaplan students know that in this argument, there is a very predictable pattern to the flaw. And it's based on the fact that the evidence that was offered here in support of the claim came in the form of studies. It says, 2 studies, right? The trend is borne out by 2 studies. Whenever the evidence in an argument is in the form of a study or a survey or a poll, about 99% of the time, the issue at hand is that you don't know whether that study or that survey was actually representative of the larger group that they're trying to make conclusions about. Whenever you see the word survey, study, poll, you should think to yourself, I don't know for sure if that sample group was actually representative of the larger group. And that's exactly the issue that's going on in this question. Back in 1980, when they did the survey, it sounds like they did a decent job because it says, at least in 1980, they did a large, randomly chosen sample. So things are okay there. Actually, as it turns out, that sounds decent. They did a large, random sample. In the year 2000, when they were surveying the software industry again, who did they survey? What does it say? What happened in the year?
Same firms.
The same firms. That is exactly the issue. Because I don't know if those firms in the year 2000 were still representative of the software industry. In fact, those of us who are close enough here to Silicon Valley to know anything about it would probably suggest that software firms that existed in 1980 are not necessarily representative of the software industry in the year 2000. There's at least a little bit of change in the industry during that time. But even if you're not an expert about the software industry at all, so you don't know things specifically about that, all I want you to recognize or pick up on is the fact that if it was representative in 1980, I don't know if we're still representative 20 years later. The right answer to this question is the choice that points that out. There's a choice that says, oh, we can't really know for sure if the firms that were a good sample in 1980 are still a good sample in the year 2000. Scan the answers. Look for a choice that you think tells us that.
Well, what about the
Go ahead.
possibility that those same firms
Uh-huh.
lost market share, so they lost?
Oh, yeah, and the reason the right answer is right is because it's taking account of the fact that those same firms may or may not any longer be representative of the software industry, right? Yeah, that's exactly the reason why the right answer is right, because it's questionable that that would be true. Anybody see one what they think is a candidate answer? Go ahead, speculate. What's your name?
Robert.
Robert. What is your guess?
Uh,
Based on our discussion.
the third,
Yeah, letter C. What does that one say?
the data in the studies refer only to companies that existed in 19.
Yeah. If you didn't know how to think about this question, it might not have been obvious why that choice mattered. But if you're trained in the fact that the GMAT, when they ask flaw questions, follows some pretty predictable patterns, you would know that, oh, they gave evidence that came from a study or a survey. When they do that, I should always question whether that survey data is representative of the larger group it's trying to represent. And choice C is the one answer that points that out, although in language that's relatively subtle. That's why this question is labeled advanced in the margin. What that means is, in the past, a high percentage of test takers have missed this question. And I think a lot of folks miss it because they don't necessarily realize that choice C is pointing out that issue of whether or not the sample is representative. So the next takeaway that I want you to pull out of this question, right? So our first takeaway was really big numbers, break them into their factors first. Second takeaway is that if you have an argument based on a survey or a study or a poll, always think about whether the survey is actually representative of the larger group. Everybody ready to go back to math? Excellent. You look eager. So go ahead and turn the page. Let's do a little bit more mathematics. So turn to the third page in your packet, and at the very bottom of the page, again, the third question, we're going to do number 49 together. We're going to make codes. So I hope you're excited. Any software engineers?
I was just going to say,
Oh,
repeat the
yeah,
second.
please go ahead.
I missed the second point of that. It's number 16.
Oh, the second takeaway that I was making was that whenever you have an argument based on survey data or a study or a poll, you should question whether the sample was actually representative of the larger group. Right? So at Kaplan, our name for this is representativeness. Right? I don't care that you remember that name as much as the idea. It's the basic, the fundamental idea in statistics. When you do a survey, if you're not careful to do it the right way, you don't know whether those data can actually be generalized to the large population. So that's a common theme on GMAT. So again, let's do some mathematics. Anybody here actually work in software? Anybody write code here? So one, excellent. So this is a terribly simplified version of that. We're going to write an incredibly simple code that's only 7 entries long. So look at number 49 at the bottom of the page, and we're going to create a code together. Excellent. Right here up front in the white shirt. What's your name?
Jen.
Jen. Yeah, excellent. Would you go ahead and read number 49 for us, and then we'll work through it together. What does the question ask?
Okay, it says a code is being made by placing one letter in each of the squares above. 3 of the letters to be used will be the letter A. 2 of the letters to be used will be the letter B. 1 of the letters to be used will be the letter C. And 1 letter to be used will be the letter D. If there is only one way to present each letter, how many different codes are possible?
Excellent. Thank you. So we're going to create a 7-letter code. The question is, how many codes are possible? The one wrinkle in this question, the one that's interesting, is that some of the letters are repeated. Some of the letters appear more than once. What I want to talk about first is how you would do this question if all 7 letters were different. Because that's actually how you start to think about this question, even though in this particular one, in number 49, some of the letters appear more than once. But let's start with the actual easier question. If I just had 7 letters in a row, right, so we'll pretend A, B, C, D, E, F, G. If I actually had 7 letters and I was just asked, how many ways can you arrange those 7 letters? The way I would do that mathematics, if it were that question, is I'd say, well, I have 7 choices for the first letter, because I have 7 letters available. How many choices do I then have for the second letter? Because I put 1 there.
6.
I only have 6 choices left for the second letter because I put 1 of them there. If they were all different, these numbers would just descend like that. If all 7 letters were different, I would multiply all of those together. This turns into 5,040. Don't worry about the math. The real point here is this, some of you may remember, we're going to go back to high school, get excited. The way this is represented generally in mathematics is with this notation. We say 7 factorial, right? The exclamation point doesn't mean you're excited about the number 7. This is the shorthand that means multiply 7 times each of the descending integer values down to 1. 7 times 6 times 5 times 3. This would be the answer if the question were, here's 7 different letters, or just literally the numbers, 1 through 7, and they ask how many ways can you arrange them? So you start at this point. The wrinkle, again, in this question, remember, some of the letters appeared more than one time. So I can't stop here. I start here, but I have to do one more thing. And as it turns out, the adjustment here is really simple. It's not complicated at all. You just have to know what to do. How many times did the letter A appear in the code? How many A's are there? There are 3 A's. And how many times does the letter B appear? Twice. And the other letters, C and D, each appear only once. So I don't need to do anything with them at all. If you are putting together a code or a string of letters or numbers, and some of them show up more than one time, all you do is divide by the number of times that it's repeated, factorial. So 3 exclamation point, right? 3 factorial, 2 factorial, 4, whichever ones show up more than once. It's actually a relatively simple adjustment. You just have to remember, oh yeah, that's what I do. Something shows up more than once, you add this piece. And now, we'll actually do math. 2 factorial is 2 times 1, right? So I'm going to take that and cancel the 2 times the 1. What is 3 factorial? What is 3 times 2 times 1? Do that math. What is that equal to? 6. Yeah, 3 factorial is 6. Right? That's what that number actually turns into. Does that make sense? So now all I have to do is multiply the numbers that remain. What is, we'll do it this way, 4 times 5? What is that? That's 20. And what's 3 times 7? 21, right? If I multiply 20 times 21, that's like multiplying 10 times 21, but twice. 10 times 21 is 210, times 2 is 420. Apparently, given these limitations, there are 420 possible codes. So when you have to do a code question on the GMAT, which actually generally will appear once per exam, you'll do one of these. If it shows up, if all of the letters are different, things are really straightforward. If there's 6 different letters, the answer is just 6 times 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. But if any of the letters show up more than once, or any of the digits repeat, you divide by the number of times that they repeat, factorial. Do that adjustment, you'll always get them right. Renee, please.
So we covered A and B.
Go ahead.
And so because C and D were only ones.
Yeah, technically, we could if we wanted, right? 1 factorial, right? C shows up 1 time. But 1 factorial is 1, right? So that's why I didn't write it. So it's not wrong
It's not
to write it.
added to.
Exactly. Yeah, it wouldn't be. You wouldn't get it wrong if you put it in. You won't get it wrong if you leave it out because it's 1.
Right.
So what matters is that you're taking account of the letters or the digit that appear more than 1 time. Those are the things you have to do. Basically what we're doing here, for those of you who are curious about the math, what we're canceling is the fact that some of the A's would be double or triple counted if I consider all of them, because the letter shows up more than once. So the function, mathematically, of what I'm doing here is I'm taking account of, oh, but remember, don't double count the B's because there are actually 2 of them and they're interchangeable. Don't triple count the A's for it to show up. That's what I'm taking care of when I do this stuff. Sergio, question?
Can you go through the part where you had 7 times 6 all the way across?
Yeah.
divide it by the 3 factorial, 2 factorial, and just repeat how you cancel them out.
Cancel. 2, I'll do it in a different color, right? 2 factorial was 2 times 1, right? 3 factorial, 3 times 2 times 1 is 6. And then these other numbers that were left is what these numbers, we multiplied everything else that was left. 7 times 5 times 4 times 3 is what's left over, and that is 420.
Factorial will always, if there was 4 factorial on the bottom, it's the sequence of multiplication 4 times
Then 3 times 2 times 1. Yep, exactly right. So yeah, all we canceled here were 3 of the term. We canceled 1 and 2 and 6. And we left everything else. Multiplied it out. Yeah. Great.
How do you figure that the first step was to do the 7
Exclamation
point?
That one? Because that is always the first step whenever you are asked, how many arrangements are possible? So any variation on that question, this is always the initial mathematics. It starts with whatever the number is available, factorial. So you'll always begin that way.
Code can be replaced with possibilities?
Yes, yeah. Think about possibilities, possible arrangements, possible outcomes, or orderings. They say all of those words, and they're interchangeable. Yeah, Robert?
Combinations and permutations.
Oh, sure. We're not going to do that now because they're so much fun that it would take the rest of the night. As part of the course event, literally, if you were in a Kaplan GMAT course, the page before this one in the book is the page where we cover the formulas for permutations and combinations, right? Things that look like this. Fun stuff. Right, simple, right? So this is stuff that we will actually cover in the class because this does come up at times on the exam. This looks far scarier than it is. It looks like, I don't know, Sanskrit or something. But this is actually learnable. It's one of the more advanced topics on the exam, but it's something that you can learn to do. Really, this is just a fancy way of describing multiplication. We all know how to multiply. You just have to make sure you multiply the right things. So yeah, we would actually cover in detail what are called combinations and permutations, and at least elementary probability theory. We don't do advanced stuff. I'm actually a statistics teacher as well. So I can go into far more detail, but we won't tonight. Let's do one more verbal question, and then we'll move back into broader context. So turn to the last page, and we're going to do together, so on the back side of the packet, we're going to do one sentence correction question together. So this is, again, one of the other verbal question types where you have a sentence. Part of the sentence is underlined, and the question is whether the sentence as written is correct. Choice A, that first answer, will always be the choice that says leave things just like they are. It's totally fine. The other 4 answers, B through E, are the choices that make changes to the underlined part. Sometimes they are changes that need to be made, and sometimes they are themselves mistakes. They are additional wrong choices. So what we're going to do is the one at the top of the page. We're going to do number 38 at the top of this page. So last sheet, top of the page, we're going to read about apparently a movie. So we'll do this one together. Right here up front in the what's your name again?
Janet.
Janet. Would you go ahead and please do us a favor and read number 38 out?
Cheered by better than expected opening big box office returns, it was decided by the movie's producer to give bonuses to the entire cast.
Excellent. Thank you. What you need to know about how this question works is that the GMAT actually has a very specific and very predictable expectation about how this kind of sentence should be written. That opening clause, the part where it says, cheered by better than expected opening week's box office returns, is what the GMAT calls a modifying phrase. That's a phrase that modifies something else in the sentence. In lots of GMAT sentence correction questions, they either show up, they come at the very beginning or the very end of the sentence, and there's either a comma right before or right after the clause to set it off from the rest of the sentence. Whenever there's a modifying phrase, here's the simple rule for the GMAT. Modifying phrases must always be immediately next to the thing that they modify. I'll say it again, because this is the GMAT's rule. It's not actually technically a grammar rule. It's just one of the things the GMAT mandates. Modifying phrases must always be immediately next to the thing that they modify. Here's what that means in the context of this sentence. We'll look at that phrase again. It says, cheered by better than expected opening week box office returns. My question to you is, who was it that was cheered by the better than expected returns? Presumably the producer, or what's the other option? It's either the producer or the cast. Those are the only two options, and that means the GMAT will require that right after the comma, when the underlined part begins, you either have to say the movie's producer or the movie's cast. Those are the only acceptable answers. So which choices are possible answers here?
Second or third.
The second one works. The third one, those are the only two that are even plausible answers based on the way that GMAT thinks about this question. Cheered by better than expected returns, either the cast or the movie's producer, so all we have to do is distinguish between that second and that third answer. One of them's right, one of them's wrong. So we're going to tell the difference between them. Back in the blue shirt, what's your name?
Mark.
Mark, if you would go ahead and read for us, please, the second and the third answer. Read both of them, and then we'll talk about them.
Sure. The entire cast was given bonuses by the movie's producer. The movie's producer decided to give the entire cast bonuses.
So notice, those say almost the same thing, right? They're pretty similar. The difference is that in one of them, the thing that came right after the modifying phrase was actually the subject of the sentence. And in one of them, what came after the modifying phrase was actually the object of the sentence. Technically, it's because one of them is written in the active voice and one of them is written in the passive voice. I don't care a lot that you think of it in those terms. What I want you to recognize is ask it this way. Who is it that gave out the bonuses? The producer gave out the bonus. That's what producers do, right? The producer is the one who putting up the money for the film. The producer is the one who gave out the bonuses. That means as between these two, no question, the GMAT's going to prefer that third answer. The movie's producer decided to give entire bonuses to the cast because the movie's producer was the one who was cheered by the opening week returns. The second answer could be correct if cheered by better than expected returns, the entire cast threw a party. Now, that could be a right answer, but it's not written that way. The entire cast was given bonuses by the producer, right? It's the producer who was cheered. The GMAT will require that third choice. So some sentence correction questions on the GMAT are literally grammar questions. They're going to expect you to remember not the names of the grammar, like you don't have to remember the names of the verb, tenses, or anything like that, but they will test grammar concepts. Some of them, like this, are literally just GMAT rules. This isn't specifically a grammar issue. Most people could read this sentence and know what was meant. It's just a matter of GMAT style. And so when you prepare for the GMAT, it's not enough to just know English grammar or contemporary business English grammar. What you have to know are a small number of idiosyncrasies of GMAT style, what the GMAT prefers in it. Kaplan, one of the things we do is we teach you is we have a relatively short list of, here are the common style points that the GMAT will expect you to know that aren't really grammar issues so much as this is just what they prefer. They're allowed to prefer whatever they want. They're the writers of the exam. But they don't change their minds over time, and so they're predictable. So it's not like an arbitrary teacher who just changes the rules from one week to the next about what counts. They have a few things that are specific, but they're consistent. And because they're consistent, you can learn them. And that's part of what we do in class. Any questions about that one or about that idea? So the takeaway, again, when you sit for the GMAT yourself, is that if you have a modifying phrase, either at the beginning or at the end of the sentence, it must be immediately next to the thing that it modifies. If you have to rewrite the sentence to get that to work out, the GMAT will require that. That's how they'll give you a right answer. Excellent. So that's just a little taste of strategy for the exam. So we do 2 verbal, 2 quantitative questions. Hope you're all now really excited about studying for this exam and doing well. I think you figured out this is learnable. It takes a little bit of time, but the exam follows patterns. Because it follows patterns, it's things you can learn to do. So let's talk a little bit more about you actually creating a plan to get ready. for this exam. What I tell everyone to do, right, first is to start by thinking about what's my list of target schools and when am I applying. We talked a little bit, at least some of you when we were mingling before, about the fact that the admissions process starts about a year before you intend to enroll. So if you were thinking about starting business school in the fall of 2012, initial rounds of applications will start in the fall of 2011, that is this year. So they will start, generally round 1 will open at most schools in October. Round 2 will open in January at most schools, and then round 3 usually is in March. So because most business schools do rolling admissions, they admit folks as they go along, your best bet, of course, is to be on top of your game and apply round 1 whenever you can. The way it generally works at most schools is that if you're not admitted in that first round, then you're just considered in the pool of applicants for round 2, right? You continue. But some of the seats have already been taken by the folks who were admitted, so you don't understand why. It's to your benefit to apply early if you're able to do so at all. All of you are making the smart step of getting information now well ahead of time before you apply. So definitely start with a practice exam. One thing you want to do is at some point pick a day when you want about 3 hours of just pure GMAT fun and go online and take a full-length practice exam. I know I'm sort of shivering with anticipation just thinking about it. So you have to pick this day. Pick a day when you really want to have a good day and do 3 hours of GMAT. And the real point of that diagnostic exam is not so much the score, but you start with a practice exam just to see which parts of this already make sense to me. Which parts did I feel pretty lost? And which parts were, well, I don't remember that, but only because I know I've learned it, I just don't remember. If I studied a little bit, I could probably figure that out. The point of an opening exam really is literally, when we call it a diagnostic, is to diagnose, right? To get a sense of how much time do I need to get where I want to go in terms of score. So don't put a lot of stock in that initial score number. It's a helpful tool, but the real purpose of that opening exam is just to get a sense of how should I prepare my studies and for how long should I be studying. Most folks on average study for something like 2 to 3 months for the GMAT. Some folks do a little bit longer, some folks do that in a shorter time frame because they have an application deadline coming really soon. But I've been teaching this exam for about 9 years. It'll be 9 years in June. And my experience has been that most folks prepare over the space of something like 2 to 3 months for the GMAT. Not full time, so you're not working 40 hours a week on the GMAT, but they're doing some consistent study most days of the week. The GMAT is certainly one of those exams where you will perform better. If you can say you needed 20 hours in a week, don't do a 20-hour GMAT day. You would do 4 or 5-hour days, right? Or you're splitting up 8 hours. Don't do an 8-hour day, right? Do a couple hours, 4 days a week, right? So more consistent study. The GMAT in some ways is like a language unto itself. And when we study a new language, we usually do a little bit every day rather than 1 day a week where you just study for hours on that. So what we would recommend, and I'm not going to make you do this now, but I just want you to start thinking about the idea that you'll have an initial score based on a practice exam. Look at the schools where you're interested in applying to get a sense of what are their median scores, what kinds of scores am I looking for. That data is available both on admissions pages. For example, you can get it directly from the schools by looking at, if you know the list of actual schools where you want to apply. You can look at general score information for a lot of schools at Kaplan's website. Of course, it's available from our friends at Beat the GMAT, where we'll give you information about schools and their expectations. So do a little bit of research, and that'll give you a better sense of where you are relative to where you want to go. And that'll give you a better sense, too, of how long it's going to take you to do that. Let's do the next slide. So at Kaplan, we'll provide you 4 different options to prepare because our general theme is one size does not fit all. That is, different folks learn in different ways based on their own schedules and their own particularities. Our most commonly chosen options are called classroom, on-site. You literally sit in a room like this one, potentially here, in this building. I teach a class right now on Tuesday nights upstairs. So you might take class in an actual Kaplan location in a facility like this one with an in-person instructor. We also teach the same course via what we call Classroom Anywhere, and what the Anywhere means is that we use a live, online environment. So you have class at a scheduled time, but instead of traveling to a location, you log in on your laptop or your computer, so you take that course sitting at work or at home or at Starbucks or wherever it is that you're on the internet. So you can have a live class and your teacher may be right down the street or across the country. And same thing will be your peers in your class. Classroom Anywhere, what's interesting as well is you always get 2 teachers when you take that course, because there's one teacher who's teaching the course and another instructor, veteran Kaplan instructor like myself, who's running the chat for the class. So they're sitting just answering your questions as you go along. So you have both like a teacher teaching and someone who just answers your questions in the online environment. So that's something that you can demo and try out as well. So if you're curious about that, you can visit captest.com/GMAT and you can do a trial of the Anywhere environment to see what that's like. We have an on-demand option. It's also online, but the difference between an on-demand course and an Anywhere course is instead of meeting at a scheduled time, the on-demand course, like the name implies, is on demand. The lessons are pre-recorded, so you can watch them anytime. So if you have a really erratic schedule from 1 week or 1 month to the next, your schedule changes up a lot, and so you don't know if you can actually stick to a dedicated meeting time. And so sometimes you want to do the class in the middle of the day, sometimes you need to do the class at 2 in the morning, and you don't really know what that's going to be. On-demand is a really flexible option that might work really well for you. So it's online, you can do it anywhere, and you can do it at any time. So that's the biggest difference between those two. We also offer, of course, one-on-one instruction, private tutoring, something that, as an instructor, I do as well. And that's available both, again, in person or online, depending on your preferences. So all I want you to take away is the idea that at Kaplan we have lots of different options because we know folks need to prepare in different ways on different time frames. And so all of those options are available to you on different kinds of schedules. Yeah.
If you choose one program,
Yep.
and let's say you're going to be out of town, can you
Yeah, sure.
go to on-demand?
Right, exactly right. So yeah, great question. Because sometimes in general, you can be there on Tuesday nights, but you're going to be out of town 1 week, something like that. Whenever you're enrolled in any of these options, you always have the option to make up class online. And then if you're in one of the on-site options, you also have the option to make up class with any other on-site class in that same location or in other locations. So you can make up classes in just a week early, also in San Francisco. Or maybe you're going to be in Austin, because you're going back for your alumni reunion, for example. So you take class there. So you totally have that option. But I really do have students who do this with some frequency. Because, that's how work happens, right? We have to travel for work, or sometimes life just happens. So certainly you have those options as well. People make up class all the time. Any other general questions? Let's talk just a little bit about the online environment. We covered before the fact that the GMAT is a computer-based test. You're going to take this exam on a computer for that reason. Outside of your class time, you don't do most of your studying in a book, but rather most of your homework and studying will actually be done at a computer to get you used to doing questions where you can't write on the passage while you read it or highlight. You can't actually draw on the geometry figure because you have to redraw it. So we have you working online, largely. And this is the splash page for your online center. So when you log in, your default center will look this way. Only here it will say, welcome back in your name. Because this is where you would start. And so as you can see, we have information about admissions, about upcoming events like the one that's happening tonight or the one that's happening next month, about the value of an MBA. Your courses would be where you would look up information like the syllabus of the course that you would be taking, you have an MBA network, and then, of course, the companions for your book. But probably the most helpful thing is to talk about what happens when you look at my courses online. You start with the dashboard. Your dashboard tells you overall information about how you've been performing on your exams to date, about when your next scheduled exam is going to be, and then the list of your resources, including here's what you've done recently and here's what you should be doing next. So it's literally an interactive syllabus that schedules things for you. The next page is the Smart Reports tool, which is Kaplan's proprietary system for keeping track of literally reporting on how you've been working. Smart Reports tracks cumulatively over time how you perform on every question type based on all of the exams and quizzes that you've taken, and then gives you recommendations on here are your top 3 strengths, the things you're doing the best at, if you need to reinforce them. And then here are your top 3 opportunities, and we're not just being nice by not calling them weaknesses. This is not a euphemism. Opportunities are literally the parts of the exam where you have the most points left to earn. So weaknesses would be the things where you got the lowest percentage. So if you had 0% on some question type, that would be a pretty glaring weakness. But if there's only 1 or 2 of them, you don't have a lot of points left to earn. There might be something else where you're at 25%. That's way better than 0. But if there are 20 of them on any given exam, you have a lot more points left to earn there. So opportunities are literally that, the parts of the exam where you have the most points left to earn. And at any given time, Smart Reports not only keeps track of what are your opportunities right now, every time you take an exam or a timed quiz, it updates based on how you perform. And so it becomes an even more powerful tool the later you are in your studies, because it gives you both up-to-date and cumulative information to help you diagnose yourself. So it does a lot of the work for you in terms of literally giving you personalized recommendations about what you need to be studying, which might not match with the person sitting next to you in class every time. You also want to talk about your assignments. So again, most of your homework is actually done on the internet. You do a great deal of the homework online. Workshops, quizzes, all of that outside of class happen at home, at your convenience, or at work for that matter. And you'll also keep track here of your CATs, or your computer adaptive tests. Let's go to that last slide. One of the great benefits about preparing for the GMAT with Kaplan is that somehow, and I do not know how we managed to do this, we convinced Pearson, these are the name of the company who actually administers the exam, so you go to a Pearson testing facility to take the test. We've convinced Pearson to allow all of our GMAT students to take as many of their computer adaptive tests at the actual Pearson Center as they would like. So not only do you have full-length practice exams, you get 10 of them as part of the course. You can take your practice exams at an actual Pearson facility. So not only do you get one trial run, you can do this 4 or 5 or 8 times at the actual Pearson location. You have to sign up in advance because you are literally taking a seat at the testing facility, but you can do, and most of my students do at least 3 or 4. You can do more, that's great. They do their practice exams at the actual testing facility so that on test day, things feel completely routine. Because not only they've done practice exams, they've done them under literal simulated test day conditions. You check in, you have your palm scanned for ID purposes every time you walk in and out of the room. I'm not making this up. Test security is really tight on test day. So you actually take practice exams there, which is pretty fantastic.
To practice with that notepad.
Yes, the fun time. Right in with your marker on the notepad. And so you just get used to what it feels like to actually go through there. And that's really important, especially for those of us who tend to have test anxiety. Test day itself feels different than practice exams. Then walk through test day multiple times to help it feel more routine and help you get more comfortable with the actual experience of the exam. We'll also give you information in general about business schools. This is also where Beat the GMAT is a great resource, right? Because they are a very large online community that give you great information about the process and give you a set of peers, right, who are going through the process at the same time. But there's lots of information and resources available to you in that regard as well. The final words that I will tell you, you can read them for yourself here, is that at Kaplan we'd like to say 3 things about ourselves as an organization. We have a proven track record. We've been teaching the GMAT as long as the GMAT has existed. When the exam started back in the 60s, we started. Kaplan's older than this exam, so nobody's been teaching the exam longer. Your learning is personalized because even though in class we'll cover some things together, via Smart Reports and interactions with your instructor, you get personalized recommendations about what you need to be studying right now to maximize your score. And best of all, Kaplan backs all of this with a guarantee. It's the reason why I work full-time for this company and still work here 9 years after I started, which is that at Kaplan, we don't just sell you a service and then wish you good luck. We guarantee that your score will improve on test day from where you started, or you can have a full refund of the money that you paid to us. I've been, again, working here almost 9 years. I've had almost exactly 2,000 students with Kaplan at this point, and I've had 2 students ever who got the same score on test day as when they started. Which means literally, my anecdotal experience has been 99.9% of my students have seen their score improve. I'm not making this number up. Yeah, I know, right here. Ironically, you'll be amused to know with these two students, one of them was someone who really did, she had a really bad day on test day. And then she took the exam again the next time it was misread. Right, things went just fine. So she just repeated the course at no cost because that's your other prerogative, right, is to repeat the course, right, at no cost, even if you just don't feel ready to take the test yet. The other student whose score did not improve, he started, his diagnostic score was in the 99th percentile on the exam. His score went up a little bit on every test in class, and then, he was an LSAT student, not a GMAT student. On test day, he had a bad day for him, and he scored exactly where he started, in other words, only in the 99th percentile, and he is now a graduate of the University of Chicago Law School, so everything worked out fine for him. But he got his money back, because Kaplan did not raise his score, so he got free prep and a degree from a top 10 law school. This is how it works. So we mean what we say with regard to this. We guarantee that you get your money back. So what we're going to talk about now, I'm going to turn things back over to Elizabeth, right, and Edith, and they're going to tell you a little bit more about the scholarship program specifically so that you can take advantage of all of these fun times and put up with me for potentially 9 sessions of GMAT prep. So thanks for your attention, folks.